Um, you can hear me, right? I'm not losing my. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna start by. I had that character I made already loaded in Mixamo, and I just searched for like a happy walking animation. And maybe you already went through this step. You know, if I'm covering something you already did, give me a second. I'm just gonna go through all the steps just so maybe it helps someone else. Also. Um, But when I download this character with the walking animation, I want to make sure it says in place as an option. Otherwise, that sort of forward motion, that like jerky loop of that forward motion, is going to come attached to this character when I try to bring them into Blender. So make sure it's always in place. And for the situation you're trying to animate, we really don't need to move them forward because we're going to rotate the earth beneath them. And then we don't really have to move the camera to follow the character or anything like that. We can just sort of populate the planet and then make it spin. So I'm going to download this dude. Give it seconds. And I'll make a new folder, planets. And call this, make a new one for model happy walk. Sounds good. Okay. So let's do first a basic setup for the character. So I'm going to go to File, Import, and it was an FBX file is what I downloaded. And let me save my file first here. I'm going to save this as on that folder for planet. Cool, planets. And then I'm going to go to File, Import, FBX, and then I put what I downloaded in a folder called Model. I'm going to select that. I'm not going to change any of these options here. Make sure animation is turned on if you don't see that. And I'm going to import. And it looks like it comes in like really, really small. Maybe this happened on your end too. And if I zoom in and select like, so we have the mesh that is what the character looks like, and then we have inside of that character, we have the armature. And if I look in my transform properties here, we see that the scale is like real, like 0.01. So if I wanted to, I could just enter a 1 value for that scale. And now their height is about like 1.38 meters, which, you know, is I guess like an average height or something like that. And if I hit play by tapping the spacebar or whatever, we see it start to animate. So I'm going to save, and real quick, I'm going to go over the steps to get that animation to loop. So right now I'm looking at my timeline window down here, which gives me like my play controls and shows some like keyframes here for my character. And if I look into that with any depth, there's just like a whole bunch of keyframes going on. And that's really like busy, and like we don't really care. We just want to know that this loops. So we don't need to like edit any of these keyframes here. We're just going to turn these keyframes into like a block, almost like a movie clip that we can then loop. So I'm going to go to, instead of this timeline editor, I'm going to click on that clock. I'm going to choose a different one. I'm going to choose the non-linear animation. And let me make this screen a little bit bigger. And I have my armature, the skeleton selected. And if I click down to look at that, we see that there's like a name attached to that sort of animation. I'm going to double click on this little block, this orange block, and call it walking. It's very helpful to rename these things. So all I did was double click and changed it to walking. And now I have the option, if I click this push down button, again, this is just inside of the armature here. I don't have any animations for the mesh or anything, so this is the only animation in my entire scene. With the skeleton selected, if I click on this push down button here, it turns all those keyframes into, it kind of like hides the keyframes from view and turns them into like just this one block of animation that you can then move around easier. On the right side of this window, there's more information that's hidden. You can either try to click on this tiny little arrow, or you can tap N as in Nancy on your keyboard, and that brings up more information. Same for any of your windows. N brings up more information. And if I select my walking clip, I can like click and drag and move it around in time. But also, if I scroll down in this animations tab for this extra information, we can choose, eventually you'll see a repeat. If I make that like 50, then we see that block, each of these ticks is where that block of animation is repeating. We could also change the scale. If we wanted to be slower, we can make that like 2, and they're walking a lot slower. 1 would be the natural timing that came with this animation. So that's all. If all my character is doing is walking, we're good. If you download, if I wanted to get like a standing or like a transitional animation, I would need to find that, download it, and there's all these steps that I have in one of those videos already to show you how to transition between, like how to like add those extra animations to this character and transition between them using these blocks in the NLA editor. But I'm just going to keep going, assuming that we're just walking. All right, so we have it looping a lot. At this point, I don't need to look at this non-linear animation window anymore. I can go back to my timeline, which I just clicked on that, option over there. And we can make this lower. If I wanted to at this point, I could extend the length of the animation. And if I tap 0 or click on my camera, we can see what's going on. We can see our characters walking, and that is looping. Maybe what we want to do now is we'd want to just move our camera. With the camera view selected, I could go to View, lock camera to View, move this camera around until it's about behind them, and then maybe move it back until we have sort of a perspective behind this character walking. I can turn it off. Sometimes what I do is, if I know my character's at the center of the world, like they're at 0, 0, 0, if I select my camera, I can make that X value 0. So I know that it is like directly sort of in line with that. And if there's weird rotation, like a weird just off Y rotation, I can enter 0 there too, which would like make it like kind of weird in that direction. So now if I hit play, we have perspective behind this character. And we could animate this so it kind of like zooms into view, or even if make it like rotate around the character if we wanted to while this is happening. But this works for now. Okay, I'm going to save. And I'm sorry if I'm going kind of fast, but I'm recording this, so if you want to, I'm going to send a link to the class in Neo so you can review this later. And so the next thing I'm going to do is add this glow. So I'm just going to do like a quick sketch of what I imagine you're trying to make. And if what I'm making is like way off, let me know. But I'm not going to add much detail. So I just added a mesh UV sphere. And this is going to be the globe. I'm going to scale this up pretty large. And then I'm going to move it down. So it's kind of resting just where this character is stepping. And I might do something where with UV spheres, they kind of have poles, kind of like the Earth, where they kind of pinch towards the top and bottom, which makes texturing and sometimes it look a little more pinched actually in the geometry. So what I might do is actually rotate this on the y-axis. Sorry. So that just rotated like 90 degrees so that whatever we're walking on has like some non-pinched, not weird, distorted looking geometry. And then it's kind of like when we rotate it, it's more like a wheel, if you can see that. Because this is all we're going to be doing. Maybe I'll right click and shade smooth and go to my modifiers and add subdivision surface so it looks way smooth. So there's a character on a globe. We could scale this up, maybe larger. And also maybe what we'd want to do is change a little bit the angle of our camera. If I change the X rotation over here, we can have it sort of pitch down a little bit more and move it up so that we're seeing a little bit more of the horizon, I guess. There's other things we could do to the camera too. If you go to the camera options, you can change the focal length, stuff like that. But again, I'm just kind of setting up the animation structure for this. So right now we have a globe, and on this globe we could create some buildings. Imagine this cube is a building. I'm gonna make it big and just scale it tall so it's kind of building-ish. I can move this around. Place some buildings in different spots. These aren't like exactly perpendicular to the ground, but I think it's okay in the situation. If you wanted to, there's an option. There is a way to sort of like fill a planet with a bunch of a certain type of object or like a group or collection of objects using particles. That could be an option going forward. I do have a demo on that in the final project guide where I show how to make like an experimental looking weird landscape, and you could apply the same technique to this. And I'm just sort of like adding objects just so we have a reference when this rotates as to what is in the world. And with these objects that I added, if I wanted to just grab them, maybe I could look from the right, duplicate them, rotate them, kind of, maybe just do that, just to make it a little bit quicker. Okay, so we have like Mario Planet scale planetoid. We have some buildings in quotation on that, and we have our character on that world. What we could do now, so again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to have the character sort of stay stationary and have the planet rotate under them. If we were to try to make this character walk around the world, it would take a little bit more complex animation stuff to make sure they're kind of standing upright constantly on this like small, or like, you know, the sort of like round object. And it's just a little bit easier to just move the earth beneath them. So what we can do is, we know all these buildings are attached to the planet. So we can just have them follow any animation that the planet has. So if I select, I'm holding shift and left clicking to select all my planets. And even what I might want to do after I select them is move them to a new collection. If I right click, I can say move to collection. And I can say a new collection and just call this buildings. And when I do that, in my outliner over here, I have a whole collection of just the buildings. So if I want to hide those buildings easily, I can get rid of them. And if I want to select them all at once, I can right click on that collection, choose select objects, and then I have them all selected. So anything I put in that collection, I can hide and manage a lot easier. So I have all my buildings selected. I'm going to hold shift and left click on that planet again. And we notice that the planet kind of has a yellowish outline, and everything else has an orange outline. And the reason the planet has a yellow outline is because it's like now the active object. And so you want to select all your buildings and then select your planet last so it has a yellow outline. With that done, if I right click, I can parent all these buildings to the planet. So all these buildings will now be attached to this planet, and if you scale the planet, all those buildings will scale with it proportionally. If you rotate it, they'll rotate with it perfectly, etc. So right click on your planet after selecting your buildings and your planet last, choose parent object. Now, if you're going to look at in this sphere in our outline is the planet, I'm going to double click on that in my outliner and just call it planet so I know what it is. If you look inside of this, you see this sort of like shadow of all of these like buildings we made, these cubes, are sort of inside of that planet. It's sort of like a hierarchy of controls. So now we can see that those buildings are attached to that planet. They still exist in our collection, but there's like a visual reference that, oh, all these things here will follow whatever this planet does. So now I can like move this planet and all those buildings move with it. And I can rotate this planet and all those buildings rotate with the planet. Something I might do if I were to make this animation is do another level of parenting. I like to add animations when a lot of things are being controlled by one keyframe. I like to have something called an empty control those things. You don't have to do this. At this point, you could, at frame 0, you could, it looks like we just need to rotate on the x-axis. So at frame 0, I could look at my transform here and right click on the X rotation, insert a single keyframe, move forward in time to like the end of our animation, we'll say 500, and then enter like 360, so it rotates once throughout my animation. And so now let's go back to the beginning. And if we hit play, oh, it's not rotating on the right axis. Wrong. All right, let's do this right. What's going on here? Oh. That? Yeah, I don't know why. I'm going to delete these keyframes, all of them, clear them all. And I'm going to, it looked like the rotation is also on Y, like the Y rotation was weird. Oh, and it looks like Y is what we actually need to rotate on. Oh, never mind. No, he's looking that way. Sorry, I'm getting confused. Let's just pretend I didn't do anything. I'm going to right click again, insert a single keyframe for X, 360 for X at the end. Add another keyframe. It's moving in a weird direction, but if I enter 0 for Y, now it's sort of moving in the right direction. But it's moving in the opposite direction. So what I need to do is for this last keyframe, I'd need to make that negative 360. Replace single keyframe. And now we might need to stop our animation. And we can still move these buildings independently. And we can still add keyframes to these buildings if we wanted to. Like say, for instance, if I wanted to have one of these buildings just like pop up. I could. Let's go into edit mode on this building. I could select the bottom vertices. Right click, snap cursor to selected. We did this a while ago on one of the demos. And then right click, set origin to 3D cursor. So I changed the origin for this building to be the base of that building. And now if I wanted to, I could like have an animation for this thing. I could change the scale of the Z to 0, and because I made the origin the base of it, it's just sort of scaling down towards that point. I can insert a keyframe, move forward in time, and I think it was something like 6. And I could add an animation of it popping up. So I need to do some work as to like filling my frame of view with some of these buildings or whatever. A lot of them are sort of outside the camera, and really we're working with like just kind of this area of our sphere. We're not really adding detail to the sides because those aren't going to be in the view of the camera. If we wanted to also at this point, I could animate my camera around this character. So I could, and here's where I'm going to add a control object for my camera. So I'm going to add an empty. And we haven't used empties very much, and I'm just going to choose plain axis. And when I do that, I get this like just little marker. And this is like a 3D object that does not render. It does not show up visually in your scene when you render it out. It's just there to help you control objects and to reference things. It's just sort of like an empty object you can use to however you wish. And I'm going to place this empty object sort of in the center of our character here. And then I'm going to choose my camera, which is floating over here. Then I'm going to hold shift, left click on that empty. And then I'm going to go right click, parent object. So now my camera is parented to this object, this empty. And I can now rotate that empty. And the camera is rotating based on the position of that empty. So I could add a keyframe for rotation on the empty, make it change over time. We could have like a panning view of our character walking while the world is rotating. Like that. I could still add keyframes and move my camera around, but it's still going to be controlled by the position, rotation, and scale of this empty. I could scale this empty, and it would make our camera get closer. And again, if I move it around, it would just move around the position of the camera. Is this helpful? Are you still there? You can text me or like chat if you want. You don't have to turn on your mic.
I'm still here. I was looking. That was so cool, the camera thingy.
The camera? The parenting the camera?
Yeah, that was so cool.
Cool.
I'll try that.
Yeah, try that out. Is this basically what you're trying to set up?
Yeah, because I'm trying to do like a animation music video for a song for my friend.
Oh, cool.
He made the song, so I'm making like a kind of Brooklyn style.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to stop recording in the live thing, but I'll send you a link to this and everyone else in class so they can check it out.
Oh.